Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Journey Back. And this is kind of another conversation regarding polarities, but this time I want to look at polarity from the standpoint of where we move into inferiority and superiority, because I think that's one of the biggest dividers, especially for people who are into spirituality, into metaphysics, into things like that. I think it's all too easy to kind of join any kind of group. And as you join that group, it's like, oh, it's almost like it goes back to religious philosophies too. It's like, oh, we're the chosen ones, or we're the right ones, or that kind of thing. And so right there, the very experiences that we're placing ourselves in to kind of feel more whole or feel more unified within ourselves is actually placing us in a space of superiority, which is a separation, right? So it's this whole idea of where we move into superiority, inferiority within ourselves, where we tell ourselves, I'm superior in this moment, I'm more than in this moment, or I'm less than. Either one of those are kind of the little tricks of the ego, right, that keep us from being able to bridge that gap back to the love that we actually are, to kind of complete our journey back. So do you have anything you want to add, Meredith? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and it's not just, it's a great point that you brought up about either different religions or there's a lot of different ways, but even within ourselves with our own feelings, like I have a tendency, there's moments I feel very peaceful and very accepting, and that I view as better than the moments I'm feeling like, oh, maybe a little sad or even just lethargic and disinterested in life, that gets judged as inferior. Right. So I think we certainly can do it with other relationships and other places, but also within ourselves. It's
Well, and I think that's a really good point, because it's like if all of life is an opportunity to love beyond what we've loved before, but in those moments where we have something that we consider inferior, then we kind of say, no, I'm going to separate from that aspect of myself because that doesn't belong, right? That's not a part. And the reason I brought up metaphysics, religions, things like that, I think all too often there's a real desire through those methodologies to kind of get to a place where we don't have to feel inferior. And so it very naturally and organically moves us to a place of superior, right? And then and what I watch so often is that instead of just, that opportunity is there to love beyond what we've loved before. The opportunity is to claim back what is actually our experience, right? To claim back, the experience. So if any given moment something is really rubbing us the wrong way, and if we're really willing to actually be with it, be present with it, love it. And by love it, I mean I don't necessarily mean that we're enjoying being in that space.
right.
That's not what I mean by loving it. Loving it to me just really means allowing ourselves to be with it. Being present with it, not separating ourselves from something, because I think there's all kinds of ways that we separate from what is. Right?
Well, and there's I'm reminded of that expression, let's rise above. And I will say, having a child on the autism spectrum and with mental health issues, that triggered my own spiritual, inquiry in earnest. And it was to try to get, to rise above it. But it is tricky, and it can feel like it's like, well, let me just see this from a higher vantage point, or let me just be more involved with it. And then it kind of does create that inferiority, superiority. And yet now there's a neutrality, having worked through that. And now there's to your point of loving it, it's not like yay, we're having another challenging time. It's not that way at all, but it's this kind of neutrality of recognizing the wholeness of the experience and learning more about myself, loving my child more deeply, so I can appreciate it, you know.
Well, and I think the rising above it, or giving yourself a different perspective that might feel a little bit better. I don't think that that's, obviously that's not a negative, but also what I notice is that if that's all that's necessary within us for us to kind of rise above it and get a different perspective, then usually the rising above it will have us holding that perspective, and we'll move forward in ease, grace, and joy, right? Whatever. But more often than not, I think that when we rise above it, if there's something that needs to be looked at, and if we're rising above as an escape from what is versus the truth of what is, it's like we all have the capacity to shift our perspective, right? In any given moment, to choose a different thought, to a certain degree, within any given moment. But what I love about the way the universe works, source works, is that if we are using that as an escape, then no matter how many times you rise above it, right? There'll
be further to go.
There'll be somewhere else to go, right? And so at some point, I think there becomes this disillusionment with rising above, or just my experience was always that I would do what I would call jacking myself up. It's like I would feel like this angst or something, didn't like that feeling, so I would jack myself up to feeling better. And then I would feel better for a while, and all of a sudden it's like that same little thing would come creeping back. And what's interesting is I think at some point you get to the place where by hook or crook, you just have to feel it, right? You just have to allow yourself to feel it. And in the moment that you do, then to your point, there's something happens that it neutralizes it, but if it's always I'm in a place of superiority, and therefore I don't have to look at that, or I'm in a place of inferiority and therefore I don't have to show that, right? It's like in either case, there's an opportunity that's being missed. And I think very rarely, I think it's more rare than one might think, for people to actually be willing to accept the invitation to be with what is, to be with what feels uncomfortable. And equally, I think it plays out equally when people are in bliss, when people are in absolute joy. Because again, inferiority, superiority says that the minute you go into bliss or joy, or you're really just feeling just delicious, that somehow that's, the mind immediately wants to go, well, that's because I'm so special. That's because I'm, superior, right? Or we'll go into this idea of, but I'm making somebody else feel inferior by feeling as good as I'm feeling, right? So I think there's that piece too. It doesn't always go just for the negative parts. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And for me too, another way for me to distinguish whether I'm in the inferior, superior, or if I'm just allowing is a feeling of either resistance against an influx of yuck, or like trying to hang on to the good time, it's just like stay here instead of just allowing all of it to just come and be like, okay, this is a hard moment, and but it's here, you know, it's kind of a reflection of what's really going on rather than how I want things to go in my head.
Right. And I think that goes back to a conversation that we had in another video around polarities, around giving ourselves the opportunity to tell ourselves the truth about that situation. Because, you know, and in any given moment, if the truth is, wow, this is really hard.
Yes.
You know, it's like makes my stomach hurt, makes me feel like this, that, or the other thing. There's a neutrality around just being honest with yourself and saying what is, right? And there's also a neutrality around being honest with others, you know, and saying what is, and that gets really challenging. And I think that's where it's almost like we would almost rather be in a place of separation, of inferiority or superiority, than to just say what is. You know, it's like that seems to be the ultimate fear. You know, we've been programmed, I think, in many ways that is the fear, to just simply say what is. So.
And yet that's where the connection is. You know, like that, for two people to be with what is together is connection. You know, like it's vulnerable and it's connection. And so it's when we get into the roles or the, you know, I'll play superior so you can feel inferior, and then we'll swap back and forth. That's a disconnect.
Right. Yeah, versus, and so the invitation is always to what is, right? The invitation is to know this is just the way it is. This is the way it feels, or this is what is in this moment. It's almost like more of a description.
Yes.
And there's a neutrality in that, right? There's
an honesty, and again, the vulnerability. And I've noticed the times I do that, especially with children, you know, when I can just be like, wow, you know, either that was amazing or that hurt or that, you know, they respond on a dime. Like I love, like that is, you know, some of my most precious interactions are when I can just say what is for myself in front of a child and watch where they go with it. Whereas, you know, I'll do that with an adult, and you'll see it really brings up, you know, all the programming of like, is that appropriate? Can we admit that? Like, even if I'm on an elevator and it's just like, it smells in here, you know, and somebody's like, oh, are we allowed to acknowledge, you know, like what's going on? You know, it's just, it's funny. It's funny.
It's, I think that the whole idea of are we in, you know, of actually even acknowledging within ourselves, it's like, you know, can we just be honest with ourselves and say, yeah, I feel superior in this moment, or I want to feel superior in this moment. It feels better to feel superior, or
even, you know, if somebody's having an accomplishment and, you know, we love this person, we wish them well, but just even to acknowledge, gosh, this makes me, I feel insecure or inferior from my own life that I don't have that, or, you know, and to just know that my feeling inferior in that moment doesn't necessarily even mean that person was trying to feel superior. It's just like, I'm just going to have this little moment by myself and I'll march on, and you don't need to own it, you know, like that we don't need to project. Because I've cornered one market doesn't mean I'm putting you in the other.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a whole nother level of awareness in and of itself. You know, it's like I think first just getting really honest, you know, with ourselves, and at least, I mean, being able to tell ourselves the truth, right? Being able to tell ourselves the truth and move from there.
Always starts there.
And what I noticed that I find so interesting is sometimes when you just tell yourself the truth, the outer landscape morphs like immediately. It's like, you know, we're looking for, I think so often we're looking for something external to kind of help us journey back to ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and the interesting thing is if we're not even willing to be truthful and honest with ourselves, how can we expect the outer landscape to reflect that to us? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always like all that movement, that journeying back. I think initially it just always initiates from inside.
Yeah.
You know, it's always, you know, the outside is reflective. And again, how we respond to it and react to it is what moves the journey forward or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so those tweaks that we get from the external environment, you know, what we perceive as external, is really just those parts of ourselves that are kind of providing an invitation to say, okay, be with this authentically.
Yes.
You know, tell yourself what you really know about this. You know, oh, I want it to be like this. I like this better than that. This doesn't feel so good, or that does feel good, or, oh, I like that. That's a good one. You know, it's like, but again, it's just that outer landscape just reflecting back to us, right? The places where we still hold these internal polarities.
Yes.
Right? And very often, especially when we have the big, you know, push against, it's like, you know, usually that will come from a place of inferiority or superiority. You know, that opportunity that's what I'm saying, to feel that tweak.
Yes.
And tell yourself the truth about it. You know, what did that tweak just do for me?
Yes.
You know, it makes me realize that this is what I'm looking for. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what helps. This is what doesn't help. This is what to be true.
And even an awareness, you know, even if it's not kind of what I want, what I don't want, an awareness of like, oh, there's that pattern again. There's that thing I say about myself that's going to prevent me.
Yeah.
So there's that patterning. There's that old programming. There's that, you know, can I love that? Can I kind of trace that back? Can I sit with that? Can I fully allow that? Oh, I do that to myself. I, you know, will doubt myself, or they are invitations, even if it doesn't feel, especially if it doesn't feel, feel inviting.
Yeah, but I also think that how often, I mean, if you ask just about anybody, you know, where their greatest growth came from, I think within the human experience, it still comes through a fair amount of discomfort, you know, and to the degree that we're willing to be with that discomfort and experience it, is the degree to which that growth can kind of make itself known. Again, provided that, because to an earlier point, I think every single time we're, okay, I'll just artificially, in my case anyway, what I would do is I would artificially kind of rise above it. So it's only you get the information in your head, but it's not the embodiment of that knowing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And it's not until we actually embody that knowing, till we come all the way back to ourselves with that knowing, that journey all the way home to self, that we can actually kind of go, yeah, okay, I'm good with that one now. You know, if it is just a general jack it up so we don't have to feel these feelings anymore, like I said, more often than not, something bigger will come along around the same. Yeah.
Exactly. So. Well, and I love that too, that, you know, we can have the first discomfort can bring an awareness to us, and we can know it. And then it's not until it's like we live with it for a while, and then we can see it more often, and then we can talk about it, and then maybe we can start responding. You know, that can be my new knee-jerk response, you know, is like, oh, okay, now I can be patient with that. I can take a breath with that. And so it's like going from that awareness to having had that experience. And so the practice, you know, it's not just an invitation or discomfort. It allows us to practice, so we can kind of travel that from our head into our bodies, into our cells, so that it becomes our new walking around point.
Yeah, I think that is the most brilliant thing too around, you know, it's like the way this universe is constructed for each and every one of us. 7 billion people or whatever, and each person is getting tweaked in just the right way.
And we fit together perfectly. So my curriculum is perfect, and yours is. It is.
Yeah. You'll reflect back to me exactly what I need to be reflected back, and again, it's like I think the opportunity is always to take the tweak, if you will, and not necessarily make it be about somebody else. It's like to really be able to give yourself the opportunity to, gain some awareness through that experience and not back up from it, not kind of knee-jerk response from it, and I think those things that do tweak us on a regular basis, even looking, I think it's a good practice to even, that tweak happens on a regular basis. What's my awareness of my knee-jerk reaction? What do I do?
Yep.
Do I go into anger? Do I go into projection? What do I do in that moment to protect me from that feeling?
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen if I just allowed myself to feel sad or feel like I'm disconnected or feel whatever it is that's being felt? Because that's going to bring a whole nother layer of awareness, right?
It is, and for me, it was a subtle shift, but a big one, years ago, that to kind of, that life is for me, like even the challenges, all of it is for me, and just to your point of like being open to that willingness is, if it's uncomfortable or it feels like a loss or it feels like a challenge, that's also for you so that you can trust. For me, the trust in has allowed me to kind of take things in a different way, where, before it was just like, this feels awful. This isn't right. This can't
be good. This can't be
right. Can't be good. Yeah. And yet ultimately all of them have been very good. It's just, for me, my thing is like, it's always a blessing. It's just how long will it take me to
figure it out? Yeah.
Like, some of them, it's like 20 years later. Okay. That was great,
Well, and I think back to that superior, inferior, the whole conversation around polarities. It's like, I think what we forget so often is that the universe, the source, the energy of all that is, it's neutral. Mm-hmm. It's just neutral. It's just constantly reflecting back our own polarities. And so it's not even like, in some ways, I don't even think it's so much that it's trying to get us to even see anything. Or, it's just neutral. It just is. And it's just a very clear reflector, and so that's what I'm saying. If we give ourselves the opportunity to take those reflections and gain awareness around it versus moving into, the projection and more often than not, I think we move into a defense, right? Our defense is, okay, I got to control this situation. How do I control it so that I can get back into a place of feeling superior or feeling like I'm on top of it, along those lines. And maybe that's not what it's about at all. Maybe that's the neutrality of the universe is just simply showing us something. This pattern exists within you. It's still there. What choice do you want to make now? What would you like to choose now? How could you go into neutral around this particular, and I think that is the invitation.
Well, that's love to me. That's love, and there's how much freedom and power, and for it may. I know we think of love as just good things, and just and yet the way you just described that neutrality and that invitation for us to know ourselves and to go through that process in a way that that we can love ourselves. It's like, gosh, that's the most loving thing of all. Not, I'm going to punish you over here, or I'm going to, I'm not of a punitive, rewarding universe. I think it is neutral to our creatorship.
Yeah. And what an amazingly mature way to interface in any dynamic, whether it's a relationship within ourselves, externally, you know, in any way, shape, or form. It's to assume that the opportunity within that relationship or that dynamic is actually to start to neutralize some of those polarities within us, or to at least show us where those polarities exist. If that's the gift in the dynamic, then that brings a whole different, and that might be a whole nother conversation on the journey back, you know, through relationship and.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway.
Exactly. Who's taking responsibility for what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, thanks for joining us again today, everybody, for the journey back. And we look forward to seeing you again on another topic at another time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.